Thank you so much, everybody. So one of the questions I was going to ask was how many of you are familiar with Ted Lasso? It seemed like a smattering, not a whole lot. That's okay, that's all right. I tried to work in, when I have examples from the show, which I do have a lot of examples, but it's really going to be about forgiveness, as you'll see. I tried to provide context. Those of you who are familiar with Ted Lasso, there are some jokes and things that I left in, because the talk does come very much from my chapter for that book. So I want to start by just acknowledging this is a real opportunity. Thank you so much for having me. Really, really grateful to do this. This is my first time doing one of the lectures. Dr. Hartenberg sent me a couple of examples, and that freaked me out a little bit. It was Dr. Marcos, Dr. Stelzer, Dr. Snell, so I know I have a high bar to live up to, but again, hopefully this will be worth all of our time. So let me go ahead and just launch in then. As Ms. Bowman said, Ted Lasso and philosophy, one of the big topics of that show, of that volume, is friendship. And I know friendship is one of the big themes that you're looking at with the lectures from this semester. So I'm going to take it a little bit more specifically with regards to forgiveness. So friendship, kind of that umbrella, and then forgiveness within that umbrella. So that's going to be my focus. I want to mention, though, the volume that David, my husband, and I just co-edited and put together for publication this year. It is out of that Wiley Blackwell Pop Culture and Philosophy series. And I just want to have a little mention about the use of pop culture. It's something that I really am drawn to in terms of thinking about bridges it's a readily accessible kind of thing that a lot of people already are interested in, and they might see talking about Ted Lasso as a doorway to talking about something a little bit deeper. So these questions of friendship, questions of competition is really big with Ted Lasso. The notion of excellence, the notion of flourishing, all of these really key ideas in the history of philosophy in the area of the humanities, liberal arts, are embedded in this very popular kind of show. As Ms. Bowman said, the book is looking at this, what seems a little superficial. There's a lot of depth to it, and that's the kind of thing that I really like to do. In fact, my husband and I actually just signed a contract for a series taking that idea of using pop culture and going deeper with Cascade, and it's going to be called the Pop Culture and the Sacred. So where pop culture and philosophy is from a more secular press, and anything that we might do that touches on questions of faith has to be more implicit. Pop culture and the sacred out of Cascade will still be using pop culture, but will really drill down on the theological, coming very explicitly and unapologetically from a Christian perspective. And so we're really excited about that. We just signed the series contract today, so I'm really excited about that. Back to Ted Lasso, though. So, again, some of you are familiar with it, but let me just give a quick overview of what the show is about for those of you who aren't. So the premise is a fish out of water idea. So we have a main character, Ted Lasso, who has coached, but yet he's being brought over from America to England, London specifically, to coach a football club, soccer. I'm going to use soccer just because we're coming from an American perspective in the book and the way that we approached it. But he knows nothing about soccer. What he's coached before has been football, and actually it's been amateur football, but the league that he's going into is actually a premier league, a professional league. I am not a soccer fan, a football fan. How many of you out there follow football, soccer? Yeah, so you get it. You get how big that would be for somebody who really doesn't know the sport at all to be put into that situation. But he's a really likable character. I mean, really positive, likable character. He's actually been brought there under false pretenses. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. That's kind of key to the show itself. But that sets up a lot of the humor of the show, cross-cultural kind of clashes. Again, someone who knows coaching and who is concerned about community and excellence in sport, but still has that gap of knowledge. It's a really feel-good sitcom, a truly feel-good sitcom. It actually premiered in 2020, not intentionally coming to the world at a time where there's a lot of turmoil. Of course, all of us remember 2020, 4 years ago. There was a global pandemic. There was a contentious election here in the States. A lot of civil unrest. So a lot of stuff happening, a lot of social turmoil, right? And here comes this show that's so positive and so optimistic. People just loved it. They latched onto it. It became, again, a very popular show. I do want to have a little word of caution, though, for those who are unfamiliar with the show. If you want to go out and look at it, it's on Apple TV. I do want to just mention, it is not, despite its very wholesome, positive main character, it does have language. Other characters are much more loose and challenge him and challenge his worldview. And also the sexual ethics of the show is very questionable. That's something that I've really tried to kind of critique and look at, and even argue that I think the sexual ethics, questionable sexual ethics, undermine some of the positive stuff that's going on. And that's, again, one of the ways in which I've used the show to explore worldview themes. Ultimately, though, this talk is not about Ted Lasso per se. What I want to use is the show to have a vehicle to talk about forgiveness. Forgiveness is really going to be the main thing. And that's a non-negotiable requirement for healthy friendships, not to mention healthy people, healthy families, healthy society. So friendship is your big umbrella theme, and I want to drill down on this one particular requirement of friendship: forgiveness. And looking at the show through this lens with this topic in mind, it really provides us a lot of opportunity to wrestle with this. What is friendship? Forgiveness. What does it involve? I do want to mention, too, that like many people, my interest in forgiveness comes from a very deeply personal place. About a decade and a half ago, someone that I counted as a really close friend betrayed me pretty deeply, pretty egregiously. And it really left me reeling. I mean, it was really a difficult time. I don't know if any of you have been through something that difficult to go through. Forgiving just even for a small thing is hard, but forgiving for something really big and really deep and somebody who's really close to you, that's really challenging. Again, I speak from experience, and it took me a long time, I mean, honestly, years, to try to wrestle with it, to try to think through. I knew that I had to forgive, but what exactly that meant, I was grasping for resources. I was trying to find the answers. And I really did work through it. It took me a while, but I did work through it. And since then, I've tried to continue to explore that area through writing. I've given a variation of this talk, not necessarily on Ted Lasso, but on other topics, thinking about forgiveness, because I think there are other people who might benefit from what I have learned and other sources that I've come across. So this topic, yes, you can discuss it rationally, dispassionately, but it also really has existential stakes. It really matters, right, to people's lives. And so I think remembering that as we go through this material is important. So Dr. Hartenberg had sent along a clip from Ted Lasso for you guys to watch. I want to highlight a couple of things about that clip, but as I do, be thinking about what questions it might raise for you about forgiveness. I watched the clip a few times today as I was thinking about the talk, and I realized most of what I want to say, I think, is in that talk, like that particular clip, that particular scene. Most of what I want to say, there's something that particular scene touches on. So I'm really curious what stood out to you, and I'd like to actually hear from you. But before I do, let me give you a little bit of background on the clip. I don't know if you just watched it cold and weren't quite sure where it came from in the series, so let me give you that background. So first of all, one of Ted's gifts, so the main character, Ted Lasso, one of his gifts as a coach is to identify the strengths of his team members. It's a really key quality, really important to the plot, really important to who he is. And he views that concept of team really expansively. It's not just the people on the pitch. It's not just the people in the uniforms. It's anybody who has anything to do with the team and with the team's success. So there's one such character that he zeroes in on pretty quickly called Nate Shelley. Nate Shelley is the character. And you might recognize that from the clip. He actually is the kit man. Again, I am no soccer person. Those of you who follow soccer probably know what a kit man is. I'm basing this on what I know of Ted Lasso. So a kit man is the guy who's in charge of all of the equipment, all of the laundry. I mean, like, he does the kind of dirty work to make sure that everybody's ready for the game. But Ted, in his interactions with Nate, realizes that Nate has a genius for strategy. He's been around soccer so long that he gets what's happening on the field, and he really sees things that other people don't. And so Ted, in these interactions, will get Nate to contribute plays. So he's asking the kit man, getting him to share plays that they actually use on the field. Eventually, he actually gets him to do a locker talk before a game, a really important game, and he does a really challenging pre-game locker talk, gets them to turn around their fortunes during that game. And by the end of the first season, Nate is promoted to coach, from kit man to coach. But Nate still has some really crippling insecurities that weren't much addressed. And so with this newfound power, newfound attention, that kind of scratches where he itches, but he can't get enough of it. And so that pride just gets out of control. Eventually, by the end of season 2, he betrays the team. He rips up an iconic Believe sign. He leaves the team for a head coaching position. It's kind of a plant. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But he has turned his back, again, unfairly so. And the team really sees this as a betrayal, rightly so. By the time of the clip that you saw, a full season has passed. So he has left the team. He's been with another club as head coach. And Ted is showing some footage from that night of the betrayal. So you can tell that that's security footage, right? And so a couple of things I want to point out here. First of all, we have Nate, who has criticized, who has betrayed the team, but we see him now not necessarily as betrayer, but crouching under a desk, right? He's not in a good place. Self-imposed, yes, but he's isolated, and especially in contrast with the team who's celebrating this great win that they've just had. In fact, ironically enough, the win comes because of a play that Nate has suggested. So it's his play. They have won. They've actually gone back up to the next tier because of this, and yet he's cowering alone under the desk, and you see that contrast. I think another big contrast in that clip that you see is between Ted and Beard. So Ted knows that Beard is the other coach, the coach who has come with Ted to England from America. Beard has seen the security footage of him ripping up the sign, but Ted says, I know you've seen it, but you haven't seen all of it. So he wants him, for some reason, to see the rest of it, right? And the rest of it, of course, is this kind of humiliating piece. And you see that laughter of Ted, but it's not a mocking laughter. There might be a little bit of mocking, but it's loving. It's kind of a loving, joking kind of thing. But Beard is very quiet. He's just watching. He's really uncomfortable, right? So he's just kind of standing there stoically. And then, of course, you have, by the end of it, Ted says, and this is on your handout, I hope that either all of us or none of us are judged by the action of our weakest moments, but rather by the strength we show when and if we are given a second chance. So that sort of putting a little fine point on what he's already shown Beard, right? And then it cuts to Beard coming to, now we know it's Nate's apartment, to see him. So there's something about that situation before that has led Beard to Nate. We also find out in that interaction that Ted is reminding Beard of something about his own backstory, right? Before this point, Coach Beard, we don't really know a whole lot about his past. It's kind of mysterious, but he opens up. He shares with Nate that he had himself betrayed Ted, and Ted had forgiven him. And so then, by virtue, we have this extension, and this is another quote that's on your handout. I don't have the quote in here, but basically the transitive kind of property of forgiveness, that I was forgiven and now, so I will forgive you. Nate, for his part, recognizes there's something that's still unsettled. Don't you want to headbutt me, he asked. Don't you want to I think it'll make both of us feel better. Instead of a headbutt, though, Coach Beard envelops him in a hug, offers him a job, right? So we have kind of a little instance of reconciliation in microcosm here. This kind of thing happens again and again in this show, and I have lots of examples that I'll point to as we continue. But for right now, based on your viewing of it, based on what I just recapped, what kinds of things stand out to you in that clip, in that scene? I guess it's kind of two scenes put together. What seems important about forgiveness from that? Nate's disbelief, yes. When he first sees him come at the door, he kind of, I don't know, it's a little like, okay, what's going to happen to me? Right, good. A little disbelief. Good. What else? What do you mean, lack of judgment?
What Ted talks about in the quote on the paper, when, or rather, not to judge someone by their...
Oh, okay, that you should kind of have judgment sort of one way or the other. All of us or none of us is judged by our worst moment, but by something else. So still a judgment, right? But maybe postponing it, giving a little bit more space, right? Good. What else? Yes, I'm sorry.
It's way easier to forgive someone who's hurt you if you hurt someone in the past and then forgive yourself.
Yes. So Beard being that kind of key figure there, that Ted is showing that for his benefit, and then he has that change of heart. One of the things I didn't say in my setup was he was pretty gleeful over Nate had gone through some difficult times, and he was pretty gleeful over that, right? And that change of attitude, change of heart, it seems to hinge on a recognition he has based on what Ted says. Good. What else? Is this an instance of forgiveness? I know it says it explicitly, but would you have put that word to it without my kind of context? Good. Does it satisfy what you expect from forgiveness? Yeah. Is there maybe more to the story that you're hopeful for?
I think it kind of goes above and beyond just normal forgiveness, because you can forgive someone without immediately putting a whole lot of trust back
Good.
into them.
Yeah, good.
But the job.
So I was hopeful that you guys were going to say some of these points that I'll bring up as we continue. I won't necessarily cover every single thing that you noticed about the scenes, but that idea of what does forgiveness itself, what exactly is involved in that, what does it require? And in this case, that's probably extravagance, a job, right? Yeah, probably a little bit beyond what's required. Maybe one more. What about Nate when he says, "Don't you want to headbutt me?" What do you think about that? Oh, I like that. Yeah. That there's maybe a forgiveness that Beard can offer him, but there's maybe some kind of internal process that Nate has to go through as well. That's good. Good. Okay. Awesome. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Might need more of the story to know kind of which way, or it could maybe be both and it could be worked out in one way, a certain element, but then something else too. Context. Good. Good. Okay. Thank you all so much. So I want to just revisit real quickly the when Ted Lasso launched. It was 2020. Its popularity, I think, was a direct response to how badly things had clearly gone in 2020. We were kind of desperate for some good news, right? And Lasso, both the show and the title character, kind of provided that good news. We have the character himself coming into a dysfunctional situation. Here's that little piece that I had said was kind of key. It's a little bit of a twist. The dysfunctional situation that he came into, the club owner, Rebecca Welton, is actually reeling from a nasty divorce that she had been going through. It's actually how she inherited the club. And she was hoping to use Ted as a pawn to basically destroy the club, because that's what she thinks that her husband, the only thing that he really loves and really cares about, she wanted to bring in a coach who was going to basically make it, just blow up, basically. So she wanted to do everything that she could to try to sabotage the situation. Also, the team itself is not really in good shape. The team is at odds with one another, lots of conflicts. And again, in 2020, that's sort of emblematic or symbolic of so much turmoil that we know happens every day in this world. We are not in Eden. We are not in paradise. We live in a world that is desperately in need of redemption, and we know it just day by day. We ourselves hurt others. We are hurt by them. We have that question, that deep question of how can things get better? How can things get better? And for the characters and viewers of Ted Lasso, we get a little glimpse of that possibility that things might be better. When Ted lands in Richmond, he immediately starts trying to figure out this work of repair. That's what he's about, is to try to fix things. And as he does so, he draws people to that same work. He models for others how they might pick up that same mantle. One of the really dramatic turnarounds on the team is that of Jamie Tart. He's a really brash superstar athlete, the team's high scorer. He's on loan to Richmond from Manchester City. He's arrogant, disdainful, self-centered. He treats everybody terribly, especially Nate. Eventually, though, he gets to be too much. They decide that he's no longer worth the trouble, not just Richmond, but Manchester City too, and he loses his position. It doesn't matter how great he is at scoring if nobody can get along with him. And so he's brought really low as a result, and he's left without a position. He has to try to come to terms with what happened and try to get on his way back. It's a process to try to find his way back, and he starts by approaching Ted. Ted is so often that character that people will go to try to fix things. And he wants his position back with the Greyhounds, with Richmond. But should he be welcomed back so easily? Sam Obisanya, one of the other players, and he had been treated terribly by Jamie Tart, he doesn't think so. When Ted brings Jamie back, though, despite Sam's protests, that gives us an opportunity to think through what it is that forgiveness is, what does it involve, what does it entail. So this is where I'm going to talk about different accounts of forgiveness, different philosophical accounts. So there are early accounts like that of Joseph Butler who identify forgiveness as a changed emotion. And this is that section on your handout where you have the 3 different theories of forgiveness. A changed emotion. The idea that no longer do you resent the wrongdoer. You now have turned away from bitterness and you've renounced malice. So a changed emotion. This is what we see in Beard's embrace of Nate, where he rejects the offer of delivering a headbutt. That changed emotion, though, should go further. It shouldn't just be, I don't want to hurt you, but maybe I wish the best for you. So some positive compassion, actively wishing the wrongdoer well. Here we might think of Beard's offer of the position, right? He actually wants to help him. There are 2 other competing theories of forgiveness, and they've been worked out. There's something called treatment accounts, which emphasize the forgiver's actions, not just emotions, but actions, and it's really focused on the volition, the will. So one might still have vengeful feelings, but resist those feelings and act positively. So there's a point where Rebecca is going to try to return Jamie to Man City, and Ted is angry about it, and yet he has made these little biscuits for her and still gives them to her even though he's angry. So that, you might say, fits into the treatment account. There's also something called performative accounts. Performative is also about actions, but this time it's not just personal actions, but in a social context. So this is where forgiveness is kind of a contract that you enact through the words that you say. You're bound by the promise that you make. So when Beard, for example, tells Nate that he forgives him, everything kind of goes together, but he tells him that he forgives him, and in so doing, he promises and he enters into a pact of sorts with Nate. So the words accomplish a performative function. So these accounts develop separately, but of course they're not at odds. They can work together, and they should work together. Your emotions, your will, your words, they mutually reinforce one another. There's another smaller little, forgiveness multiplies again and again and again and echoes throughout the show. There's a small little instance where Phoebe, it's a niece of one of the players, forgives her classmate Bernard for making fun of her. She's been hurt and shamed, but even by deciding to confront him, deciding to forgive him, some of that shame and hurt is eased. Interestingly enough, Phoebe's forgiveness precedes and even appears to elicit Bernard's sincere apology. So apology is not necessarily necessarily crucial in order to forgive, right? So her forgiveness seems to solicit that apology. And of course, in its fullest sense, forgiveness should involve all of those different pieces. But back to Jamie. His difficulty on returning to Richmond sheds comical light to that dynamic that forgiveness can be a process, and it should culminate in reconciliation. He realizes that to be welcomed back fully, he has to own up to his mistakes. So what he does, his team is telling him, is cataloging all the different things that he's done, and they're pretty funny. Colin calls him a jaundiced worm. He calls Colin a jaundiced worm, and he does so in his hometown paper. He hits on one of the other players' mothers. He cups a fart and makes one of the players smell it, and it sounds better in French, he says. These are bad things on their own, but of course there's a pattern that's being pointed to, a pattern of misbehavior, mistreatment of others. So the team might forgive Jamie, but restoring that relationship, that reconciliation, it's going to take time. There's going to need to be some sort of evidence that there's a change. It requires better behavior for Jamie. It's not to consign Jamie to permanent shame over the past, but rather it's to give him a chance to show that he has left those disgraceful behaviors behind. Jamie knows that something's required of him, and he starts by trying to buy everybody PlayStations. That's his first idea. Like, I'm just going to buy them PlayStations, and then they'll love me. But that's not so easy. I mean, he has the money. That's not really a big sacrifice, right? Rather, what is the kicker? What's needed is where he stands in solidarity with Sam and the other Nigerian players and taking on this big conglomerate, Cerithium Oil, and he risks his position. I mean, the position that he just got back, he risks it. But in that solidarity, it demonstrates that he has changed. He's no longer that selfish, disdainful, arrogant person. He's humbly presenting himself as one of the team. So again, that really shifts things. So Jamie's come a really long way, and his transformation suggests that within this world of Ted Lasso, there's freedom from this corrupt habit. Now, Jamie's not the worst of them, though. We do have other people who have more entrenched patterns. We'll get to those in a minute, but I do want to take a little bit of a detour. So why is it that forgiveness is kind of that means to fixing things? I want to do a little bit of a drill down on forgiveness itself. So this points to the work of Eleanor Stump, and she talks about forgiveness as being, yes, it should culminate in reconciliation, but you probably want to conceptually uncouple those. So forgiveness being one thing, reconciliation, yes, being the culmination of a process, but if you aim at that, you might miss that first step, that important first step. So she says, she actually draws on Thomas Aquinas' understanding of love to explore this. So for Aquinas, love involves two interlocking desires, and this is on your handout, I believe. The desire for another's good and the desire for union with another. So it's about the desire in the heart of the person, loving the person, forgiving. So a forgiving spirit will resonate with both of these desires. Now, it might seem unfair to shift the demands of forgiveness to the wronged party. Why is it that the team, the ones who were hurt by Jamie, are the ones that have to forgive him? Isn't he the one who should bear the burden? Imposing on the team the responsibility to set things right seems to compound the offense. But forgiveness, we'll find, is liberating. It actually allows you to kind of turn the tables on the offender, which sounds like you're, concerned about power, but it actually does give you some power over the wrongdoing. Forgiveness unshackles the victim from wrongdoers and from the chains of resentment, freeing them to pursue a better path. Again, regardless of how the wrongdoer feels. For Jamie, he has to forgive his father, for example. It's a gift that he gives himself, Ted says. And Ted Lasso features many instances where characters have to forgive others for team unity, for genuine fellowship to resume. Colin has to forgive Nate. Sam has to forgive Jamie. And on and on and on. I do want to just mention this Desmond Tutu quote because I have it in your handout. Again, that burden of forgiveness, it is heavy, it is hard. But the alternative to not forgive, what kind of world would that be? That's what Desmond Tutu's quote points to. He says, "It is clear that if we look only to retributive justice, then we could just as well close up shop. Forgiveness is not some nebulous thing," he says. "It is practical politics. Without forgiveness, there is no future." Again, think about that world that we were describing before. Wrong in this world. If we're done there, if we stop there, where do we go? Right? You need something to get past it. So by distinguishing between desire for another's good and for union with the other, and actuality, the affecting of that good in another, the affecting of union with the other, Stump actually allows kind of a hopeful response to wrongdoing. What it does is sizes up the situation, looks at the harm that's done, considers the moral standing of the offender, the contingencies of time and circumstance. There might be someone you have to forgive who is no longer here, right? That still is something that you need to work through to, again, let it go, right? To forgive someone who's no longer with us. All of those features matter when you think about forgiveness. But that means when we think about the desire for the good of the other, desire for union with the other, that forgiveness can be one-sided, even if reconciliation cannot. Of course, it's lamentable if reconciliation doesn't happen, but even worse is cheap grace that naively resumes fellowship without counting the cost. Rebecca, the club owner, she actually knows from painful experience from her own upbringing that overlooking offense only breeds yet more offense. Her father had cheated on her mother, and her mother just kept turning a blind eye. Did that make everything better? No. Is that forgiveness? No. Right? That's not the way to deal with it. And that actually, I think, helps explain some of her own overreaction to her husband's betrayals. So Rebecca may not yet be where she needs to be with regards to Rupert, but she does know that excusing his behavior is not going to get her there. Forgiveness is a process. At least that's the case for forgiveness of people when it's personal, when it's unfair, there's a deep hurt. But entering into that process requires an unflinching honesty. We can't forgive harm that we don't acknowledge. And this is another quote on your handout. This comes from a great book, Forgive and Forget by Lewis Smedes. It's a book that I discovered a couple of years ago. Really fantastic exploration of this topic, very practical, pastoral. He says, "There is no real forgiving unless there is first relentless exposure and honest judgment. When we forgive evil, we do not excuse it, we do not tolerate it, we do not smother it. We look evil full in the face, call it what it is, let its horror shock and stun and enrage us, and only then do we forgive it." So forgiveness, actually, you had said something about the judging, right? It does judge, but in a way that's fair, in a way that still allows room for grace, in a way that takes stock of the full situation, right? Including ourselves, including who we are. I'm going to skip this next little section. Let me see. Yeah, I do want to get to Rupert, I think. I just want to make sure that I talk about Rupert because he's really the big, if there's a villain in Ted Lasso, it's Rupert. So Rebecca, the club owner of Richmond, Rupert was her ex-husband, and he had cheated on her pretty flagrantly, and really just shamed her, just really, again, terrible mistreatment. And so her reaction is understandable on one hand because she's so hurt and she wants to lash out. And he has some really deep entrenched patterns. How she deals with it, that gets a little tricky. So I want to talk about this. So in Rupert, we do see a little bit of what Aristotle might describe as the bad person. Such a figure might be someone like Milton's Satan, who is pursuing, who is engaged so much in bad habit that he's corrupted his reason. He can't even distinguish good from bad. In fact, he's done it so much that he can't even see moral truths. Moral truths have become invisible for him. Rupert seems to be in this category, or at least treading its verge. His misbehavior escalates episode after episode. He enjoys crashing the charity auction and surprising Rebecca at the pub. He's so dastardly, you can't even believe he was ever a positive figure that he's described at certain points. He takes jabs at Rebecca's appearance, her drinking, her tenure as the club owner, and he's doing it all with a twinkle in his eye. By all indications, Rupert believes he's entitled to treat others this way. He's like Jamie Tart magnified, a million times, pretty bad. He not only persists in his bad behavior, he seems to become increasingly desensitized to the harm that he's doing, not just to others, but also to himself. He gets his hooks back into Richmond through his new wife's shares, where she purchases some. He steals Nate away for the head coach of West Ham, which is a new club that he has bought. And taken to its logical conclusion, such a path would make it very difficult for one like Rupert to turn around. Rebecca has a friend, Sassy, who seems to agree, who seems to think there's no hope for him. She gleefully, again, revels in his, any negative things that happen to him. She's reveling in them. She's like what C.S. Lewis warns against. This is in your handout too, where she might read a story about Rupert in the paper where maybe he's not as bad as she thought, right? And Lewis says, is one's first feeling upon reading that, thank God even they aren't quite so bad? Or is it a feeling of disappointment or even a determination to cling to that first story for the sheer pleasure of thinking your enemy is as bad as possible? If it is the second, then it is, I'm afraid, the first step in a process which, if followed to the end, will make us into devils. You see, one is beginning to wish that black was a little blacker. If we give that wish its head, later on we shall wish to see gray as black, and then wish to see white itself as black. Finally, we shall insist on seeing everything, God, our friends, ourselves, as bad, and not being able to stop doing it. We shall be fixed forever in a universe of pure hatred. It's just so, I just want to pause here for a minute, because Sassy is doing this, is thinking this about Rupert out of what you would think is a good thing, out of friendship for her friend, out of love for her friend. But see how twisted it can get to wish something so ill on another. Rebecca's mother takes the other tack, probably unsurprising considering how she responded to her own husband's cheating. She tells Rebecca that the best way to deal with people like Rupert is to make sure they know they can't get you. She actually invites him back to a reception after her husband's funeral. Worse, she poses a false dichotomy between being loving and being right in explaining why she treats Rupert so well. As though you have to choose between the two of them. Sometimes it feels like you do, but trying to figure out that integration, I think that's really key. How can you claim truth and love at the same time? Should Rupert accept Deborah's invitation, the mother's invitation to community, he'll have more opportunity to lash out at Rebecca. Both Sassy and Rebecca miss the mark at two extremes. Ted, on the other hand, has a more balanced approach when it comes to Rupert. Ted sees Rupert's character with crystal clarity. Rupert's passive-aggressive treatment of Rebecca at a charity gala with its covert and savage digs raises Ted's hackles. And he accuses him basically of having sabotaged the musical guest. Later, he encourages Rebecca. He says, "You may think that you're the only one who can see who he really is, but you're not." Rupert's not fooling Ted. Even still, Ted resists writing him off and instead gives Rupert an opportunity to recognize and turn from his destructive ways. Ted allows Rupert's pride to set himself up for a fall. He fails to be curious and instead is judgmental. Even if you've not seen Ted Lasso, maybe you've seen that dart scene. There's a really kind of key dart scene, that little videos going around where Ted has been playing the darts. He's been doing okay, but then he's like, "Oh, I forgot that I was right-handed or left-handed." Whatever, I can't remember which one it is. And then starts getting the, bullseyes. I don't play darts either, so I'm not sure exactly what that is. But he, wins, and he tells Rupert that he's judgmental, not curious. So Rupert has been standing in judgment over him and not really paying attention. And so he's kind of been hoisted by his own petard, right? He has kind of lost the bet because of his own pride and his own self-centeredness. So Ted kind of, again, sets him up for the fall. It backfires spectacularly. And this is actually the kind of tough love, even grace, had Rupert availed himself of it. Now that's the key. Rupert does not. Jamie had his own spectacular fall, but he responded well. That kind of harkens back to that opening scene that you had watched with Nate, with Ted saying it's not our worst moments, but how we respond if we get a second chance. Importantly, though, it's Rupert's choice how he responds, and Ted doesn't sacrifice either truth or his integrity in the process. Rebecca's an interesting case. Rebecca has actually both, and this is the case for most of us, right? Both been hurt very badly, but has also hurt Ted and others very badly. So she's like Beard, right? Where he is been hurt by Nate, but has also himself that history of hurting others. We see a lot of growth in her with regards to this. Her first step has got to be to turn away from revenge, to forgive Rupert, really. It's a striking moment, and it precedes her confession to Ted. We're going to watch a clip here in just a minute. Not yet, Lily. But the setup for that clip, I want to tell you just a bit. So Rupert loves launching these barbs, I had said before, at Rebecca. And he tries to catch her off guard. And he does at this certain point. He comes into her office and says, "I just wanted to make sure I told you before it comes out in the press. Bex, his new wife, and he are having a baby. And she had wanted a baby desperately when they were married, but he had told her no, he didn't want a child. And so it was very much a barb at her. I mean, it was really, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Rupert Giles. No. So Anthony Head is the one who plays Rupert Mannion in Ted Lasso, and he is one of the best characters on TV from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which I know is ages and ages ago. Rupert Giles, very lovable, very charismatic, just really sweet. He brings that exact same charm to Rupert Mannion, but for twisted ends. And so he has like a little glint in his eye when he's telling her, just wanting to see how she reacts. It's really bad. It's really bad. And so she sees this, and she seems to recognize that if she keeps going down that path, that's where she's going to end up. She's going to end up someone who loves to bring misery on another person. And it's a turning point for her. She had already been thinking about coming clean, to Ted, and that does it, where she sees her future, basically. So in that moment, she realizes that the path her vengeance has set her on. Rupert, he's gone down that path for a while. He's probably going to continue to go down that path, even bringing a child into that dysfunctional situation to be a pawn in his game. And that really pulls her back from the edge, sets her on the right track. Yes, she still has a long way to go at that point, just like Jamie did when he comes back. But that's the only way to fix things, right? So she too goes and asks for forgiveness. And this is actually the time for that clip. So this is the scene with her confessing. Oh, actually, can you stop that, please? There was a separate clip that was sent. This is not the one to do. Can you please stop it, please? Please stop it, because this is not the one to do. Okay, so I don't know if you're going to be able to see it. There was a second one that cut off the first 48 seconds. Okay. I can see if Dr. Hartenberg can send that to you. I wanted to make sure it didn't have the language or anything troubling in it. I had wanted you to see it, but I'll pass it along to Dr. Hartenberg and ask him to pass it to you guys. It's really a beautiful, beautiful scene, but I want to just make sure it's set just on the confession part. So she comes in and she, again, has been lying to Ted. I mean, she's been lying to him throughout a whole season. She's been doing things behind his back to try to set him up for failing. There have been moments where you've seen, oh, they're becoming friends, they're becoming close, she's changing. And yet there's still this lie, right? How can you be friends with that huge lie between you? She realizes you cannot. And so she comes into his office and she unburdens herself. She tells him everything. She tells him why she brought him. She tells him each thing, just like with Jamie going through all of the different things that he had done and confessing it. She too owns up to it. And she's bracing herself, right? So Nate, as when Coach Beard comes to him, he doesn't know what's gonna happen, what's the outcome gonna be. It's a risk, right? To ask for forgiveness, it's a risk. To offer forgiveness is a risk. Love is a risk, right? There's that beautiful passage from C.S. Lewis that says, to love anything, you are making yourself vulnerable. The only way to not is to lock your heart up, right? So to open yourself up to another person, to confess, to ask forgiveness, to offer forgiveness, again, you don't know what's beyond that. And so it's really powerful the way that it is presented. Again, she presents herself, confesses, and then just braces herself. She too, like Nate, how he says, don't you want to headbutt me? She says something like, if you want to go back to America, if you want to go to the press, whatever. She puts herself at his mercy, which I think is evidence that it's genuine repentance, right? Because she's not trying to control the game. She's not trying to make sure her bases are all covered. She just lays herself there at his mercy. And as you probably can guess, Ted Lasso forgives her immediately forgives her. There's something about his strength of character where, yes, she had done him wrong. Yes, she was wrong. I mean, there was something to forgive, but he's a very strong character in many ways. And so he is able to absorb that. He is able to accept that without lashing out, without any kind of repercussion, without, again, trying to put her in her place or anything. It's just done. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful scene. Again, immediately, I forgive you. I see you. And in doing that, one of the things I think that I had said earlier that I cut out of the paper, it's like he's putting a divide between who she is, the real Rebecca, and that other action, that's not really her, and we're going to separate that off. This is you, and we're going to preserve this. We want this. This is the you that we're going to attend to. Again, kind of cutting that off. And she holds out her hand for shaking it. Again, that reconciliation, things are better. And actually, I think he holds out his hand, and then she goes in for a hug. And again, it's a beautiful, beautiful image. But with Rupert, we don't know. He doesn't seem like he's ever going to get to that point. He's been brought really low many times, many ways. Yes, he can turn back. A C.S. Lewis quote here, where he says from Mere Christianity, where he says, progress means getting nearer to the place you want to be. And if you had taken a wrong road, then to go forward does not get you any nearer. If you are on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn and walking back to the right road. And in that case, the man who turns back soonest is the most progressive man. We don't ever see Rupert realizing he's on the wrong road. We don't ever see it. And it's tempting to say he's not going to. The title of my chapter in the Ted Lasso and Philosophy book is Rupert Beyond Redemption? And so it's kind of a provocative title. And sometimes it's tempting to think someone might be beyond the reach of grace. Perhaps he could put himself by his choices that way, but I don't think that's for us to say. And I think holding out the best, holding out hope wisely. If you see someone who is so determined to be doing the wrong thing and to cause harm and pain, opening your heart to that person as Rebecca's mother does, is not good for you. It's not good for that person. So it does take wisdom to know. And I'm not saying we get it right every single time. But wanting the best, desiring the best, hoping for the best, that is something that we can do with God's grace. As I said, this paper, this chapter was in Wiley Blackwell, a secular press. It is built on Christian foundations out of my own beliefs, as a Christian, but it's very implicit. It is not ever explicitly laid out. I do, and I want to just kind of push that point here. The only reason we can forgive is because we have been forgiven. You see that with Beard, right? He's been forgiven by a person, and he can forgive. The ultimate forgiveness, the ultimate reconciliation is Christ's atonement on the cross. That is why we are able to. That is what empowers us to. And one thing that I didn't talk about much in this paper, but I'd be glad to field questions if you have any along these lines. This is a TV show, right? And Rupert's bad, but he's still a TV character. So, how bad can it really be, right? Forgiveness still forgiveness is still operative in those extremely difficult cases. It is available. It is possible. Again, not on our own strength at all, but on Christ's strength through us. It is. And I would just encourage you, if you are struggling with anything with regards to forgiveness, I would really encourage you to pursue that grace, pursue that, like really, as I said, I went through it a couple of years. My husband can testify that it was difficult. It was difficult. But God really did something in me through that. I know he did. And I know he brought healing to that situation. And so again, I would just really encourage you, don't give up on it. Don't give up on it. So I think that's what I got today. Thank you. So I think we have about 20 minutes or so. They had said about 6:15. So questions, we have plenty of time for questions. Yes?
Would you say from your experience, healing is a very repetitive process?
Yes.
Wounds, we almost get these emotional scabs that constantly crack open from
Yes.
stimuli. You just have to keep reminding yourself over and over again.
Yes. And so the question was, can it be sort of a repetitive process? It feels like you're moving ahead and then you're kind of brought back, right? One thing I want to say, sort of in bigger context for answer for your question, is that every instance of forgiveness, I think, is so individualized because of who the person is that has been wronged, because of the person who has done the wrong, because of the conditions under which it happens. There's just so many different factors. Doesn't mean there's not guidance available. There is. But each individual circumstance, situation, it will often feel like it's just, you're just kind of spinning your wheels, just kind of going in circles. But I think just trust the process. Trust that even if it feels like you're still being brought back, there can be maybe going back over the same ground and more healing done that maybe you hadn't noticed before. Yeah, definitely. And I think sometimes, so with regards to the situation I had described personally, and even Rebecca's situation, the person is non-repentant. So when you have a situation like that, it's almost like, yes, there was a wrong, but there's also like more and more and more wrongs. Like every single day that there isn't an honesty, a confession, a repentance, it's an additional wrong, So it might feel like it's going back, but maybe it's actually a fresh harm, Yes, ma'am. Yes. 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 I think that's fantastic. And this sort of gets at the question of like who they are, right? Because I think ultimately every single one of us, again, I'm saying this on my Christian convictions, our fundamental reality is made in the image of God, right? Now we can reject that. We can, decide and choose otherwise and again, kind of go down this road where we distort ourselves, right? And I think we would do well to recognize that is a possibility of people that we're interacting with. So when people say who they are, maybe who they're choosing to be, where they are at currently, there's no one-size-fits-all with regards to forgiveness or with regards to the bigger process. So forgiveness, kind of this bigger idea of including reconciliation, but then sort of on a smaller thing, just wanting the best for the other, wishing that you could have union with the other, but also recognizing there's the better part of wisdom to know when that's not good, when that's not just not good for you, not good for that other person, because if you are putting that person in a position where continued harm is like their temptation. Again, I had used the example of Rupert being invited back to the house where he would have free reign and access to Rebecca to just keep on picking. That's not good for him. It's not good for him. There's a quote I have in my paper that I hadn't read from James Baldwin, where he talks about when you mistreat someone else, you are harming yourself. It's a beautiful quote. I'm not finding it real easy. I wish I would have put it on the handout. So in other words, you cannot treat someone else. Oh, here it is. Here it is. So James Baldwin, he says it's a terrible and inexorable, so it's like one that you can't get away from, law that one cannot deny the humanity of another without diminishing one's own. In the face of one's victim, one sees oneself. So choosing the person having free reign to victimize another, they are also harming themselves and twisting themselves. And so I do think it requires wisdom to know. Wisdom to know. Not that we're going to get it right every time. And one of the things that I say in the chapter is that it is fallible people who forgive and fallible people who are forgiven. So we're doing the best we can. And again, really praying through it is what I'd encourage, praying for wisdom. Yes? Good question. That's a really good question. I think it's nice to do, probably for that, and it comes from my paper, probably for that performative piece, right? By saying it out loud, it almost is a promise. So, will you forgive me? Yes, I will forgive you. And it's said over and over again in the show, and I like that, where it's like plainly said. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that before. So I like the question because it made me think of it. I guess you don't have to, but I think it's a good thing to do because it almost like clinches it. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Timothy.
So my question may be a bit complex, but I've been thinking about through the lecture Christ statement on the Sermon on the Mount, that if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your heavenly Father forgive their trespasses.
Yes.
Later added on, like with the parable of the unforgiving servants, and this notion that you can reject God's
Yes.
by not forgiving others. But it still seems that even in those instances, God would still be having that entailment of love that Eleanor Stump describes, of desiring that person's good, desiring that
Yes.
desiring a meeting with that person, and yet he's withholding forgiveness due to their actions.
Yeah.
What would maybe be a fuller? It just seems like there's something more to forgiveness than simply desiring the other person's good and entailing love.
Yeah. So a different presentation that I've done actually looks at the Lord's Prayer. And that one, it always got to me, that one petition in the Lord's Prayer where it says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And it's almost like that's wrenched out of context and, you're not forgiving others, so you're not forgiven, kind of becomes, because believe me, I know that forgiveness and that mandate to forgive can become a little stick to beat people. I mean, it really can be twisted badly. I think probably the answer is that there's a whole transformation that God wants in our lives, in us, right? And I think part of the acknowledging that you have things to be forgiven and that you need to forgive others, so it's almost like flip sides of the same coin, that we have hurt others and others have hurt us, that if we really want to see the world and ourselves and who God is and who we are rightly, that those two realizations, and they don't necessarily always go hand in hand, but they need to kind of come together. And so I do think, and I guess it goes back to your theology, because I do think that God is freely offering us forgiveness, and we just have to avail ourselves of that forgiveness, accept it, right? And part of that acceptance is the owning up, is the being honest, is acknowledging who we are, what state we are. In that larger talk with the Lord's Prayer, I kind of go through how that petition is not in isolation, and even the parable of the unforgiving servant, it's in a broader context of Jesus's mission. Jesus' whole mission here was to effect reconciliation, right? So it's almost like he affects the reconciliation and encourages us to come along with him. So I do think that forgiveness, that offer is genuine, but it's almost like still conceptually the reconciliation requires our surrender, our acceptance of it. And it's a little artificial, I suppose, though I do think, and I usually come from an abuse situation when I think about this topic, so admittedly I have that kind of in mind. And I think if you lay the burden of, and reconciliation has to come with forgiveness, onto it, it can be hard to see those times that maybe we would be unwise to embrace reconciliation as well. Obviously, with Christ, the reconciliation, there's no risk there. I mean, to surrender ourselves to Christ, we're not putting ourselves in harm's way, but to open ourselves to other people, we might be putting ourselves in harm's way. I don't know if that helps. Kind of wrestle with it a little bit more. And again, I think with regards to forgiveness, it's best, I guess, I was going to say it's best thought about in particular situations, because so many contingencies, so many specific details, that surround it. Yeah. Other questions? Well, if there aren't any other questions, it's probably okay. Before you go, we do have a book, a Ted Lasso and philosophy book. And even if you've not seen the show, the book has lots of great insights into philosophy, and it's delivering it in a fun kind of way. And so it would be kind of open to, I think, available to anybody. But David, you had said that you might decide. What? Okay, so David is going to decide who gets the book. You want to do it like separately after we dismiss? Okay, he's going to do it after we dismiss. But thank you all so much for your time, and I'll try to pass that clip along to Dr. Hartenberg to send to you guys. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yay.